This was 3 months in the summer, and I absolutely hated this job. Hi, I'm Rachel Lynn, and I'm on a journey to get out of my student loan debt and lose some weight along the way. If any of that interests you, go ahead and click that red subscribe button down below. Today I am talking about all of the jobs that I've had. I've had a lot of jobs in my life, and I just kind of wanted to take some time and just reflect on everything that I've done in order to make money. First job I ever had was, I guess, babysitting. I really can't remember the last time I babysat. It was probably somewhere in 2011 or 2012. So it's been a while since I actually babysat, and I actually really miss it. I love spending time with kids and just, you know, like playing and being silly and having fun. And I am a teacher, and I taught kindergarten for the last 5 years, and I'm currently looking for a new job, hopefully in an upper grade. But I love working with children. But there's something completely different between being a teacher and being a babysitter, where you have just like one or a couple of kids at a time compared to a whole class. With a whole class, it's more about like management and just kind of like directing kids and helping teach them and helping them grow overall. But with babysitting, like, you really get to know the kids that you're working with and know them personally. Now, it's one thing to get to know my students personally, which I make it a goal to do, but it's a whole nother thing when you listen to your students talk about a show that they like compared to you watch a show with somebody that you babysit. You know, you can talk about individual shows and characters rather than like, oh, well, that's great, that's a show I've never seen. So the first real job that I had that actually like took taxes out of my check and all of that, and I got a payroll check, was working at a kennel. When I was in high school, I actually wanted to be a veterinarian, and I actually job shadowed a vet when I was a junior in high school. It was all part of a research paper that we had to write, and that's when I decided I did not want to be a vet. It would be way too hard for me to do something like that, because I was there on probably not one of the best days. She had to put down a cat, and I didn't see that. She did not subject me to that. But I did see her and how she handled that personally, and it was very hard for her, and it would be very hard for me to do things like that. But my first job was working in a kennel. I loved working with dogs and cats. I loved it. I really did. I didn't even mind like scooping up all the poop and stuff like that. I really didn't mind. That was probably the worst part of the job, but it was still just kind of like, I just really liked that job. I especially loved feeding the dogs. They got so excited. The next job that I had, and I actually remember working at Target on my 16th birthday. So the first job that I had at the kennel, I wasn't even 16 yet. So I worked at Target for, I don't know, probably about 6 months. It wasn't like my favorite job ever. I really didn't like it all that much. I don't know if I would like it now. It was just hard for me because I was a cashier, and it was a lot of standing in one place. And when I worked at the kennel, I was up and moving a lot, but I was moving around and walking around and not standing in one place. And standing in one place at Target, it was really hard for me. I actually ended up with a lot of foot and back pain from that job. The next job that I had lasted for about 3 months, and again, I was still in high school at this point, and I worked at Kroger. I was a bagger. I wasn't old enough to actually be a cashier, even though once I started working, there were other kids my age that were cashiers. They just couldn't scan beer, and they had to have a supervisor come over and scan it for them. But when I applied, they wouldn't let me apply to be a cashier because I wasn't old enough. Whatever. But I was a bagger, and baggers were also responsible for bringing in the carts in the parking lot. And this was 3 months in the summer, and I absolutely hated this job. I also had a horrible schedule, and the supervisors at that particular Kroger were not that great. Now, I do a lot of shopping at Kroger. I love shopping at Kroger, but it was just not the job for me at all. When I first started, I used to switch schedules with bringing in carts with some of the other like big burly guys. They liked going out and moving around and like fishing out the shopping carts and stuff. They liked doing that, and so we would switch schedules, and then later on in the summer the supervisors were like, no, you can't do that anymore. And there were a couple of times where I was scheduled for like 2 shifts to be out in the parking lot at a time, like 2 shifts in a row in the scalding heat of the summer, and it was horrible. I hated it. I actually ended up quitting that job because I had a fairly late shift, like till, I don't know, 8 or 9 that night, and then had to be back there the next day at 6. And I finished out my shift for that day, and then when I left I was like, you know what, I'm not coming back in the next morning. And there were a lot of people that quit around the same time that I did. Most of them put in 2 weeks, but I didn't. That was the first job that I quit without notice, actually. And then I think it was 2 or 3 days later, I had my next job, and I was working at Life Uniform. This is a store that sells nurses' uniforms and like scrubs and things like that. I'm not even sure if it still exists. I know several of the stores around me have closed down, but I don't know if they're still around or if they've just kind of like minimized the number of stores they have. We also sold shoes, and we sold like stethoscopes and a whole bunch of like, you know, supplies and stuff that, you know, nurses and doctors might need. I loved this job. I absolutely loved this job. I think I loved it because it was so small, and there were only like 3 employees. Well, 3 employees and then the manager, and the manager only worked like once a week because I think she like managed 2 different stores. But it was such a small place, and I often worked like on my own. And I think I just really liked the responsibility that came with that job. I liked checking in the packages and, you know, checking things off, and I liked putting things out. The one thing that I didn't like was straightening the racks and like making everything look nice, and not necessarily cleaning up, but just going through and making everything look nice. It was just kind of like, once I did that, and then somebody came looking for something, and then they messed up the racks, and then I had to go back and redo it. It just felt like it was just, my attempts were futile, and I just did not like doing that part. But everything else I really liked. I was often responsible for closing out the day, so I had to like wrap up all the money, and like there was just like so many different things that I was responsible for, and I loved it. I started this job when I was a senior in high school. My sophomore year of college, I was still working this job. So I took a break when I started college, and then when I came back for the summer, I started working there again, and then actually kept that job while I was in college and drove home on the weekends in order to work there. Unfortunately, the driving home from college, which was like an hour and a half away, just kind of took its toll on me eventually, and so I ended up getting a job closer to Richmond, Kentucky, where I attended Eastern Kentucky University, and I got a job near there. And I started working at Sonny's. This was my very first like restaurant job, and I had never ever wanted to work in a restaurant. I knew that it was hard work, and that it was just like terrible, and you weren't treated very nicely. This is just all stuff that I got from other people that I knew that worked in different, especially fast food restaurants. And I was not a server. I was actually a cashier, so I was paid, I guess, minimum wage. I'm not really sure how much I got paid, but the job wasn't too bad. I went home smelling like barbecue every day. If you don't know, Sonny's is a barbecue place, and I just went home smelling like barbecue every day. I think that was just like the biggest downside. I worked there for a few months until my roommate that I had at the time, she had worked at a retail clothing store called Goodies. She kind of gave me a reference, and I started working at Goodies in Lexington. So that was a little bit of a drive. It was about 20-25 minutes to get there, as opposed to the short drive for Sonny's, but at least I wouldn't come home smelling like barbecue every day. And I actually thought, oh, this will be great. I loved working in the retail industry when I was at Life Uniform, so this is like right up my alley. And I started working at Goodies, and then discovered, no, this is not up my alley. This was horrible. So I know that I mentioned that I did not like straightening the racks. That was the worst thing that I hated doing at Life Uniform, and at Goodies, that was my only job. I was actually in charge of the children's section, and all I had to do was walk around and straighten the racks and make sure that clothes were put away where they were supposed to be put. Yeah, the one thing that I hated doing, and that was the only thing I did at this job. I'm really not entirely sure how long that job lasted. It wasn't too long, and there were some really weird behind the scenes things going on that I was hearing from my roommate at the time, and it just was not a good working environment, on top of the fact that I was doing the one thing that I absolutely hated from my last retail job. So with the new school year, I actually started working at an after-school care program, and so I would go to my classes during the day. I was still in college, and then I would go and work in the afternoons and do after-school care at the school that was on campus. I loved this job. I really, really did. By this point, I had changed my major to teaching, and I knew that that's what I wanted to do, and it was great to like actually work with kids, knowing that that's what I was going to go into. But when the summer came, that job was over, and I actually got a recommendation from a parent that was at the school. They weren't involved in the after-school care program, but a parent was looking for a nanny for the summer and even beyond. And then I actually started doing that with this one particular family, and I worked with them for several years, and that was my job all the way until long after I had finished college. After I had been with this family for about a year, there was another family that moved in across the street from them, and I babysat them on occasion as well. And I really like that they had kids that were similar in age, and so even when I was with this one family, a lot of times I was with both families at the same time. And this was my absolute favorite job I've ever had. This family was like my family, and there was a point in my life where this little girl that I babysat or was a nanny for, she was like my best friend. And like, I don't know if that's sad to say or not, because I mean, I had friends my age, but still, like, I just loved caring for this family. At this point, let's see, the oldest one of that family graduated college and the youngest one, I think she is 16 now, so gosh, it feels like so long. She's so old. But they actually ended up moving to another state, and so I really haven't actually seen them for several years, but occasionally you know, talk to them through Facebook or maybe even on the phone. But that definitely was my absolute favorite job, probably because it didn't really feel like a job, but I still kind of got paid for it, so it was great. In this time, I attempted to sell Mary Kay. That's a whole nother video, really, it is. But I didn't really succeed at that very much. It was definitely short-lived, but still, it's worth a whole video. And ever since I was 18, I have actually worked at Churchill Downs. Now, I really only worked Oaks and Derby, but then I think in like 2004, it was after I had been at college for a couple of years, I started working at Keeneland as well, because Keeneland is in Lexington and it's about 30 minutes from where I was in Richmond. I have actually also gone to Maryland and worked the Preakness, and I've gone to New York and worked the Belmont, I think twice on that one. So I've actually done that a couple of times, and so I guess those would be separate jobs but the same job. But Churchill and Keeneland, I consider those two jobs, but they're kind of the same job. I also was a substitute teacher for probably about 5 years, and then there was another year that I did it after I had taught for a year. I did it for like half a year. So I have been a substitute teacher for more than 5 years of my life. I don't mind subbing. The thing that I don't like about that is you don't know the kids' names, and so like you can't call them out on things. But I do like subbing in the fact that it's as close to teaching as you can get without all the extra meetings and extra teacher work that you have to do. And I actually subbed in 3 different counties total. I also had an on-campus job as a graduate student. I worked in the Masters of Public Health department. That's actually the family that I nannied. Their mom was in charge of the Masters of Public Health, and so I actually like worked for her. I actually really like that job too. I think it's because, I mean, there weren't a lot of people that I worked with. It was just like a very small office, and I was in charge of putting together files in order for that program to become accredited. I actually had a big part in helping the Masters of Public Health program become accredited at Eastern Kentucky University because I helped put together the file system for that, and so that was something that I really enjoyed doing. organization's right up my alley. In 2010, I was having trouble getting subbing jobs because the economy was not doing so well around that time, and I ended up getting a job at a daycare for something a little bit more steady. I made more money subbing, but I wasn't subbing very many days just because there were a lot of subs in the system. So I started working at a daycare, and I was there for 2 years. I really liked this job too. I loved working with my school-age kids. That's the room that I was in charge of. I did not really like the 2-year-old room. Actually, I preferred 2-year-olds over 3-year-olds, but the 2-year-old room, it was not set up well, and just there, like if you had to use the sink at all, then you couldn't see the kids, and that not a good setup. But I did really enjoy that job for the most part. In 2011, I actually lost my car and I had to get a new one, and in order to make my car payment, which I'd never had a car payment before, I had to get another job, and so I started working at Culver's. I worked there for a year, and I kind of liked this job. I mean, it wasn't the best, and there were certain supervisors I liked over other ones, but it really wasn't that bad, and I've actually considered working at Culver's again just because, I mean, it really wasn't that bad. And my favorite part was probably taking home extra custard at the end of the day. If there was like a flavor of the day that, you know, we would make some extra like in cartons that people could come and buy, and once we made enough, they can only sell so many, and if there was still a lot of the flavor of the day left over, then I might get to take some home, and that was always a treat. Then in 2012, I finally got my very first teaching job. I worked in a middle school, and I was a math and reading interventionist, and that's where you work with kids that they aren't kids that are special education kids, but then they need extra help in order to get back on track. And so I pulled small groups, and I mostly worked with 7th grade, and even though I'm an elementary teacher, they wanted an elementary teacher to teach like elementary skills that these kids had kind of like missed. And so I did that for a whole school year. Then the next year I was a sub for like half a year, and then in January of that next school year, I started working as an interventionist again, but this time in an elementary school, and I pulled small groups, and I worked with K through 5, every single grade, and had a different group from each grade. And I did math and reading intervention. And then in 2014, I finally got my very first classroom of my own, and I started teaching kindergarten in Northern Kentucky. And I was up there for 3 years. While I was up there, I also took on a summer job to try to earn some extra money, and I worked at Meijer, and I worked in the bakery, and I didn't mind that, except that I was having trouble with my knees, and then also my wrists were like going numb. I don't know if it was full-on carpal tunnel or not, but like my wrists were going numb because of the trays, because I like made the donuts in the morning and stuff, and so like it was really hard on my wrists. And my wrists are fine now that that job's done, but my knees have still never really been the same. But I was having some knee and back issues with that job because I was on my feet and bending and moving and twisting and lifting heavy things in ways that you probably shouldn't lift. So other than that, I really didn't mind that job. But once summer was over, then I couldn't do the 4 a.m. schedule anymore, so I went to the deli, and that wasn't as much fun at all. I didn't really like the deli that much. But then the schedule, just having a second job while trying to teach, especially only my second year teaching, was really, really hard, so I ended up leaving that job so that I could focus just on teaching. Then in 2017, I moved back to Louisville, and I got another job. I actually applied to teach 3rd or 5th grade, but they actually ended up asking me if I would teach kindergarten, probably because of my experience in kindergarten, and so that's what I did the last 2 years, is teach kindergarten. In that time, I've done a few other tiny little things. I don't even know if these would be considered jobs. I did surveys online for a few months and actually made quite a bit of money, but it did take up a lot of time. I also worked for Rev, where you do transcribing closed captions and stuff, and I did that for about a week. That was a lot of work for very little pay. And I am also selling stuff on Poshmark, and have thought about turning that into a full-on side hustle if it ever gets up off the ground, but I haven't really sold enough of my own things to go and outsource from different places. But it is something that I'm considering, and it is kind of another job that I do. And then of course my last job, I don't know if this really counts, but YouTube. So I have made money on YouTube before, way back in the day in 2014, back when they had old standards and they weren't quite so strict, and I ended up making $200 in about 2 years time. And then now I have actually been remonetized under the new standards, and I'm currently making money now, but it's a very minimal amount, so I don't know if that really counts as a job, but I treat it like a job because I want to keep creating content. I love doing YouTube, and so I just keep doing it and kind of treat it like a job, but it's a job that I absolutely love, and a job that I would continue doing whether I got paid or not. Now I am on to looking for my next job because I have left my last school, and I'm hoping to teach like an upper grade. I'm not really sure, I don't know, 1st through 5th, somewhere in there. But if I had to teach kindergarten again, I would so do it. I love teaching kindergarten. I am looking for a job in a district that pays a little bit more than what I was making, and hopefully I can also change grade levels as well. So there will be another job to add to that. But as of the recording of this video, I don't have a job. Those are all the jobs that I have had. I would love to know from you. You could tell me about all of the jobs you've had, or just tell me about your favorite job you've ever had. So leave me a comment down below and let me know. Also, don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you are not already. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.